Good morning and welcome to Money and Mindset with the Doctors. I'm Dr. Stephanie Ardrey, known as Dr. Money.
And this is Dr. Thyonne Gordon, the story genius. How you guys doing today?
Great. How you doing?
I'm good. Always trying to adjust the cameras. Like, which way am I supposed to sit? Where am I supposed to be? It's so hard to tell on these monitors. I have this big screen monitor and it's really hard to tell. How was your last week? How did last week go? You have a good week?
So last week was a pretty good week. I stayed on task pretty much with studies, except down to the last minute, a little partying over the weekend and all of that stuff, but was able to get everything done on time.
Well, they say all work and no play make you a dull girl. So you don't want to be too dull. Got to stay relevant.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You need those breaks because it's dense material, dense assignments, the whole nine. But,
Well, we talked last time a little bit. I think I showed the clip on the She Ready Foundation and the foster youth that we're supporting. And we had an opportunity to work with the 15 interns on last Friday and got them headshots and got their stories on video. And boy, what amazing young people we have that are going into the world forward to just make our next generation.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting. Yeah, I'm so excited about the work that you guys are doing. You ladies are doing. That's the word. The ladies are handling. Absolutely. Yeah, very excited about the organization and the work. I know there's such a need.
Yeah, and even though it's the She Ready Foundation, of course, we work with young boys and girls and youth of all ages that are in the foster care system. And what was most impressive to me is, of course, their stories, because I love stories, but their stories about what they saw into the future. And they weren't letting their past challenges and struggles and obstacles determine where they were going to go for their future. And to me, that is what every business person and every entrepreneur or even career person needs to think about, is you can't let your past determine what happens to you in the future. However, you absolutely can learn from your past. And because we have had such a institution of people before us that were like giants in terms of people of color, we have had some giants that came before us. Our ancestors have allowed us to stand on their shoulders. And I think of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He has a program called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, talking about the Harlem Renaissance period and what he learned from the people during that era and how it impacted his life to be who he is. And I just think looking at our past and learning from it, building on it, standing on the shoulders of those giants, Dr. King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, all these people that we've heard of and some people that we haven't heard of, is so important. Remembering my mom, I think about how she took care of children. She was the ultimate entrepreneur and networker and did so many different things. And here I am standing on her shoulders, kind of doing the same type of thing in a different way. And, Dr. Money, how does that relate in terms of your life and in terms of how money flows, in terms of generational wealth?
Wow. Well, you gave a lot in that. I have a lot of angles to go there. But what I'll say,
I'm trying to give you a whole bunch of stuff to work with.
You sure
whatever you want to do.
There's a lot to choose from there. But what I would say is today, if my mother were on this side, would be her 73rd birthday. And so it's exciting in a sense that May has been topsy-turvy over the years, but I can honestly say that this has been one of the happiest Mays I've had in a long time. And I just feel a renewed energy and joy. And the reason I think that it's such a happy May is that there was a point where I thought, well, maybe I had gotten lost in my purpose and assignment or gotten so far off track that there wasn't a course correction that, could get me back to where it was I was destined to be. But it's so interesting because when I think about the things that have been my career truly has been stepping on my mother's shoulders in so many ways. You know, I was so interested in communication in the arts. She was an artist, she was an illustrator. You know, she didn't get the support and encouragement, but she was just really gifted in that regard. I was gifted with instruments, you know, piano, violin, and dance. And I was always the music and the dancer, the dance. I was dancing in my crib. So you guys don't take it from me. I've been doing it all my life, you know? And so
I'm really glad to hear that. You know why. But we'll keep going.
My assignment. And so, you know, it was interesting because just about a week ago, I was moving a box that I knew should have unpacked a long time ago. But anyway, moved this box, and in it was a few more of my mom's books. And so at this point, her books and my books are connected, mixed in some of my libraries. And what struck me was I had picked up this book entitled
Holistic Health, a practical guide.
Yeah, this book was written back in 1972.
Wow.
And just as soon as I opened the book up, and then in the front, it was a library book. My mother used to buy the library book. She spent some time, she worked for the city of Oakland, and she was at the library for a while before the police department. And it was so interesting because library books, after circulation, they'll sell them used. So she bought it used. But even when I opened up the dates that it had been in circulation, it was in circulation from August 26, 1982 to May 25th, 1984. August 26th happened to be my birthday, and May 25th happens to be her birthday. And so I thought, I don't know if there's anything that I should, but I felt I better read this book just on GP. But as I open the book and I think about the business and the holistic health, and it's like, this has been a progressive process of she planted the seed. You know, I grew up on Back to Eden, eating brown rice when it was not the thing to do. You know, people thought we were weird because I had, you know, such this different meal assortment, my diet, right? And so when I think about it and now, and it's like, so what are you doing in life? Well, building wellness centers and farming, and, you know, it's like mind, body, and soul.
It goes right back to it. And for that book to have been in circulation for that period of time, both of your birthdays coinciding on the dates, that is almost just so uncanny. But you know, nothing is an accident. There are no accidents. There are no coincidences. There are just collisions on a course with God. And this was one of those collisions.
Wow.
That you actually had an opportunity to see how you intersected and met with what your mother instilled in you from growing up to where you are today with your 420 Wellness.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. So I'm so grateful because I definitely feel that it's a special time, and it feels wonderful that the world has been thinking about and talking about health and the options to access health, the ability to utilize technology to be able to monitor their health somewhat on their own, to monitor their diets, you know, to get information that can build your mental, your physical. You know, we have so many tools available. And that's rewarding because we're creating a 120 club. Ardrey had been floating the idea that full life is 120 years of age. And so sharing some of the data that supported some of the evidence of people that lived longer lives, the nutrients that they had within their systems and how that propelled them forward, but the activities. And so one of the things that he wants to do is be the fastest centurion. He loves track, and I used to run track. And so he's convinced me to train with him to do some sprints. So we'll see.
Okay. So the 120 club, where you get to live up to 120 or beyond.
Yes, exactly. And so I was casually talking to a friend of mine, Eric, and he says, yeah, I'm down for the 120. And I'm like, well, then I'm gonna start the club.
And you know, when you start thinking about the 120, you can even think about it in terms of the not just the mindset to become a centurion, to get to that 120 years, to get to that place where you can move forward even more. But think back on the generations 100 years ago. What were our forefathers doing? What was going on? This is the 100th year anniversary, May 31st, June 1st, 100th year anniversary of the Tulsa bombing.
Wow.
And what happened with that Tulsa massacre, where wealth, this is where generational wealth began. This thriving town of Black folk that were doing the thing, having their own banks, having their own stores, having their own businesses, and doing well.
Yes.
And some folks said, they doing a little bit too well.
Yeah.
We're going to take this from them. And literally massacred the town.
Yeah.
There is still a woman alive. Her name is Viola Fletcher. And she was 7 years old when the massacre happened. And she's actually still alive. She testified before Congress a couple of days ago, talking about that experience of what she went through. And I'm going to read a little bit of what Viola said. She said, and she was testifying before the House Judiciary Committee, calling for justice and for the country to officially acknowledge the massacre ahead of the 100th anniversary on May 31st. And she said, I still see Black men being shot, Black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see Black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. This was the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921, which is also called the Tulsa Race Massacre. And it resulted in the decimation of the city's Greenwood district, a then Black economic hub, also known as Black Wall Street. And this was when a mob of white rioters looted and burned the community down. So to hear the voices of someone like Viola Fletcher tell that story, of course it hurts, it hits your heart when you think about what you see there. But also fast forward to now, we see the smoke, we hear the screams, we see our Black boys dying in the streets.
Right.
It may not look like a Black Wall Street, but it's our people dying in the streets, and we still haven't reached that generational wealth that is so hard to come by. Studies show that it would take us 200 years to catch up right now if we continue at the pace that we're doing now. Latina race, 80 years. Big difference. How do we get to catch up? How do we begin to learn from our past, not live in it, but learn from it and push through it? How can we break through and get to this generational wealth cycle and break the cycle of us being destroyed? And that's a general question.
Interesting, but it's a great question. And I actually have some thoughts around it. One, I was thinking about this a few days ago because I had some frustration in just some of the interactions with, sadly, some of us about doing business with some of us. And I was a little bit disheartened for a second. And then I jumped to, well, they're just uneducated about business. And then, that didn't exactly sit right either, because it's like, I know the history of business. And then it finally hit that, well, they're misinformed. They lack information, accurate information about their history and who they are as it relates to legacy and the history of our ancestors as entrepreneurs, not only before the teenagers were kidnapped into slavery, but beyond that, because that context of who was kidnapped and pulled into slavery is not always exposed. It wasn't like you took the leaders of the countries, of the tribes, and enslaved them. These were younger people who had elders and families and wealth and communities. So it's just like if somebody kidnapped our teenager
Mm-hmm.
and took them to a different land, and some of them had the ability to survive. They had to use their entrepreneurial, their DNA of creativity to survive those atrocities. And still, some of them have the will to create, which was the precursor to being able to create a Tulsa. And I'm sure, even though we hear limited updates about, if we really went on a journey, we could find examples of communities that were thriving communities, 100 years ago around this country, but face similar attack and demise. And it's amazing that if I keep telling you a story and the story is limited, that becomes the narrative, which again is why it's so important for us to tell our stories real time. Everybody should be capturing their stories so that your great great grands 120 years later, someone can hear from you your perspective and commentary on that particular time. But kind of in this idea of, and so it made me think two things. One, all of that, but also the second part is I'm going to see if I can get a Chef Keaty as a guest on our show, because he does a phenomenal job in sort of framing and giving this background and context. And a lot of the work that he's doing internationally and specifically on the continent is around these ideals and principles of, again, health and wealth and mindset, but really understanding our history and understanding how our history really is part of what is essential for us to create better possibilities and outcomes.
Oh, that would be great. And just a little shout out to Andrea Jackson, who says Angela Bassett and Courtney Vance are actually producing a limited series on Tulsa. So we will have to check that out. Thank you, Andrea, for sharing that. And Chico Brown is in the house. Chico Brown, good morning. I've been looking for you. I'm glad that you checked in. I know you're still around. Got some things I have to talk to you about too. Chico Brown runs studio, but also continues to help our youth in the community through his organizations. One of them, which I work with him on, was Reach Back LA, always helping young people and bringing in celebrity to help young people as well.
Excellent.
But I love this idea you're talking about bringing in a guest to talk about things, a guest that we've had before, and it was difficult to hear her, but wealth of information, is Lorna Johnson. And Lorna is on a campaign right now, and she is really talking about this and how we have been robbed of our generational wealth, the whys of it, and where the money is. And Lorna has been talking about this whole idea around the gatekeepers in the venture capital world, and that the gatekeepers are not, they don't look like us. So when they are distributing money and looking at businesses to support and to invest in, they don't always consider us as businesses that are viable, even when we are prepared. Even when we have what the next person has, we actually have to have 10 times more in order to get the gatekeepers to take a look at the businesses we have and say, I want to invest in that and make this happen. So that's another area that I think will be interesting for us to speak on, is who are these gatekeepers? How do you get to be a venture capitalist? Where the monies are coming from? She talks about the unions and the different places where the money comes from, and how we must demand that money still be spread out with equity. And equity versus equality, because equity means you need to let some people catch up. They might need a little higher bench.
Well, you're hitting right into my sweet spot. I did my doctoral dissertation on venture capital, specifically after spending 8 years as, actively involved with the other side, evaluating the funds, evaluating the companies, being in the room, making the decisions about who got to receive funding. And hosting forums to diversify that. And then, of course, my active role and involvement with the Los Angeles Black Investors Club was also a reason that that organization, I was happy to be involved in that organization and still am involved with helping to not only train, educate, and develop entrepreneurs of underserved or diverse backgrounds, or however you want to categorize these groups who somehow or another never seem to get the capital. And I've hosted a couple of fireside chats with Arlen Hamilton, who was one of the, young VCs that did successfully get a fund and has been able to deploy her capital, and her fund has been re-upped and she's been able to continue. And so, yes, this is, my wheelhouse. Of course, I love having these conversations, but also more importantly, it's why I've been pushing and doing what it is I do, and why it's so important with this whole idea behind not only the Dr. Money and Show, but it was to bring more of the content and information, the how to understand. But what you have to remember, if I give you nothing else, is that investors invest in relationships. And the number one mistake that is made oftentimes is because if we go back to the conversation of when you begin to form those relationships, people form relationships with the kids typically in their neighborhood. Maybe you expand it out a little bit to the kids that went to your same college, your alma mater, to the young adults that maybe you mentored in an organization that you were a part of. You see, so it's relationship. And so part of the reason that people who lack access is because they lack access to a relationship, because they didn't understand the importance of cultivating that relationship, building the bridge before you needed to cross it. That's all the difference in the world. Mm-hmm. That's what I explained to what Sterling's life is that's different than a lot of folks. Sterling could get investors because he's grown up with these people. Henry Wong, who controls a fund in Silicon Valley, he told Sterling, call me Uncle Henry. I'm like, Sterling, do you realize the kind of fund that he's controlling, telling you to call him Uncle Henry? That's a relationship. The guys that found the K5 Venture, Amir, in Orange County, where I was active, as a venture associate with K5 Ventures, they know Sterling. If he were to show up with he can get an audience. He can get an audience in this community because they've watched him. He pitched and won money. The CEO of Pedigo Bikes, he walked into a venture and wasn't supposed to be presenting and presented and took all the money and all the prizes that were aimed at other entrepreneurs. But that's relationship, right? We have to create those opportunities. And it hurts me so often when I hear families or people say to me, well, they don't want their kids to be in a conversation around venture and capital. They don't want to have that conversation with their kids. And it's like, well, you're depriving them. You're putting them further and further behind. They need to not only understand the conversation, they need to understand the relationships that they should be creating.
Well, what it seems like you're talking about right now is when we talk about capital and when we talk about how capital works, we think about capital as money, but we have to understand that there are different types of capital. You're talking about social capital.
Yes.
How do we develop these relationships? So social capital is all about the relationships and how we work with people. I'm glad Chico is on here because Chico is like the king of social capital. When we worked together with a place called Home Youth Center, Chico had those relationships that he could bring in and I could close. So that is so important to be able to network and to work with people and understand how to work with people at different levels, because you have to remember there is a poem, and within the poem there's a verse that says, and I believe it's Desiderata, but I believe it says something like, know how to walk with kings, but keep the common touch. And that is about knowing how to be with those venture capitalists and still know how to be yourself.
Yes.
So having social capital is so important in terms of what you're talking about. Now, the part that people may be a little afraid of is probably the financial capital. And that financial capital speaks to the money and the resources that you need and the education that you need to get to where you want your business to grow. And even with that, when you're coming into a venture capital space, what we've learned from you, Dr. Money, and what we've learned as we go along is you also need human capital. You need a team. You got to have a team of people that are going to work with you, walk with you along the journey before a venture capitalist, those people who are looking at you to give you the money, will take a look at you. So you need all three: social, human, and what was the other one I said? Human and financial.
Yeah, financial.
So you need all three in order to get your business going. But starting with those relationships, as you talked about, is key. And I think that kind of takes us right back to where we started in terms of how we build and stand on the shoulders of those before us. Taking a glimpse back in time and seeing, how did we come to where we are? Who are we based on who the people were before us, our ancestors, these people who have given us this great gift to be here today discussing something like this, that we actually could be talking about, how do we get venture capitalists to look at us?
Yeah.
That is what our ancestors left us. That's the remnants from the Tulsa Massacre. That's the remnants from Black Wall Street. We don't only have to look at the massacre, which we absolutely have to look at, but we have to look at why it was called a massacre. Not just because we killed people, but we killed generational wealth. We took away what we had started to build, but we can build it back because we built it before. And I think it's probably time for us to start wrapping up. So I'm going to let you have some closing words.
Well, it's true. And I think we are in that process of building, again, rebuilding with a new awareness. You know, when I look at what has transpired, and also today is recognized as the 1-year anniversary of the George Floyd killing. And, you know, that tragic event, though, has marked another intersection along our journey and has become part of the historical fabric. There was a conversation I caught this morning on CBS where they were discussing a year ago the amount of donations that were received to support social justice causes or organizations. And a year ago, organizations received a significant increase, something to the tune of 30-40%. The sad commentary is, of course, a year later, as things tend to happen, it's back down to less than 5% of support of those particular causes, which is kind of twofold of what we've been saying, and was part of what urged that inner something to say, let's continue with this effort, because we have to be ready before opportunities are presented, because you never know the duration of the type of opportunity. So that period of time where there were lots of sources of foundation dollars looking to support causes, I'm sure that there were causes that were not properly prepared and weren't able to receive. And unfortunately now, a year later, those donations have retracted again back to the lower percentages, where kind of it's a beauty contest to see who gets and receives funding. But don't be deterred. Don't be deterred. What I urge everyone to do is to think about, at this moment, where your organization could be a year from now, where your business could be a year from now. Be encouraged as we look historically in terms of what our ancestors have accomplished. Our ancestors were brilliant. Our ancestors were determined. Our ancestors had some unstoppable DNA. When you think about it, for us to have had enough to continue to go forward, and you still look at the determination. You know, people have said, how do you find that inner something? And it's like, I don't know, but it's just in there. I feel like Intel in the computer. It's just in there, you know, and it's part of that gift, right? So, as we think about and continue these conversations about capital, about our organizations, be they entrepreneurial ventures or causes that we're supporting, you know, foundations or organizations where we're contributing back into our communities or other communities, they all require kind of on a high level three important ingredients. They need capital, they need capacity, and that's that other set of resources, that human, that tech, those materials. They need capacity, and they need customers. They need someone that contributes their dollars because they believe in the value proposition that that business or organization is bringing forth. And so with that, we hope that as you're thinking about those ideas, that two things will happen. One, you'll join us again next week, same time, same place. But at the same time, you'll think about if you have questions, if you have an ability to contribute to this conversation, if you should be a guest on our show because you have a message that's relevant to our conversation, we absolutely would invite you to send us some information. You can reach me at info at drmoney.live, Live, and I'll make sure that that goes out in the chat. And then also we will put up Dr. Story Genius's information as well. But what we want to do is create an expanded conversation, invite you in closer into this conversation as we set forth our plans to further advance companies. And remember, it's about money and mindset at the end of the day. And that's how we're going to create generational wealth. So hopefully with that, TG, did that kind of put a bow on it?
I think that sums it up. I'm going to do a quick commercial shout out to one of my girls, Bashira Ahmad, who has Born Warrior lines. I'm wearing a Born Warrior outfit. Woo! Born Warrior. That's her logo.
I love it.
The bee there. It's a bee, but it looks like a warrior. So yeah, it's one of her little outfits, and it's
I like it.
Nice little thing there.
Do you know the web address?
It should be Born Warrior. I believe it's Born Warrior. So she has athletic wear. She also does training and works with you to get your body ready and fit and all that.
Oh,
her
yes.
Warrior outfit. I'll wear. Here's the outfit. This little jacket.
Oh, I love it. Oh, yes. I will have to get. Oh, yeah.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah. I like it. Oh, yeah.
Born Warrior, Bashira Ahmad.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I need that.
Okay. Yep.
Yep.
An outfit from Bashira.
Have to get my outfit going. And Dr. Thyonne, where should people email you if they want to get in touch?
They can email me, or they can just go to beyondstory.com and there's a contact us page. Beyondstory.com.
Got it. All right. Well, with that, everyone, we'll see you next week. All right.